100 Days with Jesus. And today's focus chapter in the Gospels as we walk to the story of Jesus together is Matthew chapter 27. It is one of a quartet of chapters between the four Gospels that tell the story of Calvary, that tell the story of Jesus' death by crucifixion, tell of him being crucified. So yesterday we covered Mark 15, which was one of those um, one of the four, and tonight Matthew 27. And Matthew 27 goes and retells a lot of the same things that Mark 15 tells, but it goes and also adds a lot of other material, a lot of other content that we did not have in just Mark's gospel. So, and that actually shows a lot of that shows up in the earlier part of chapter 27. So here we are. Jesus has been tried during the night, and as I mentioned um, as an intro to Mark 15, same thing here. Jesus has been tried through the night. He'd been arrested, betrayed, and arrested by one of his 12 disciples, or he was betrayed by one of his 12 disciples, but arrested by uh, an angry mob um, who came out of the cover of night. Um, anyway, so he was arrested, tried throughout the night by Annas, by the father-in-law of the high priest, by Caiaphas, and then early in the morning by the Jerusalem council, the Jewish leadership, the Sanhedrin. Um, and so when daybreak came, all the chief priests, the elders of the people plotted against Jesus to put him to death. After tying him up, they led him away, and they'd already condemned him to death based on some of the things that he said. They said that they considered to be blasphemy. So they were just figuring out how to be able to carry that out and carry that out within the bounds of the Roman law. So they tied him up, led him away, and handed him over to Pilate, the governor, the Roman governor of that area. Full name Pontius Pilate. And so then Matthew goes ahead and tells us a little bit more about the story of Judas and what happened to him after he betrayed Jesus. Judas did not apparently realize that he was going to be condemned to death. But upon realizing that, he had remorse and realized that, he had betrayed an innocent man. He knew that Jesus didn't deserve to die. Although he was so focused, I guess, on getting his 30 pieces of silver that he didn't really pay attention to the possibility that that would happen. Or when it did happen, he was um, overwhelming is an understatement, overwhelmingly uh, remorseful that he had done this. He didn't do the repentance that Peter did with his bitter weeping and his eventual restoration that Jesus brings to him, but it was remorse short of repentance. And so he brought the 30 pieces back to the priests, the chief priests and the elders and said, I've sinned. I've betrayed innocent blood. And then they say, what's that to us? That's on you. It's like, wow. So he threw the silver into the synagogue, or into the sanctuary, that is, sorry, and departed. But then he also went and he hanged himself. Instead of turning to Jesus with his guilt, instead of turning to God with his guilt, he kept it all to himself and let it snip out his life from this earth. And so then the chief priest, this is something that's just really kind of bizarrely ironic. The chief priest, they took the silver and said, it's not lawful to put it in the temple treasury. Since it's blood money, since it's used to pay for someone's murder as the price of blood, Do they not also condemn themselves on the same in the same note? Because they're the ones that paid the money. Aren't the ones who paid the money more guilty than the one who received it to betray him? Do they not realize? Did they not realize? They conferred together and they bought the potter's field with a as a burial place. To the day of the writing of this gospel, it was called the blood field or the field of blood. And then what was spoken through the prophet Jeremiah, they took 30 pieces of silver, the price of him whose price was set for the Israelites, and they gave them for the potter's field, as the Lord directed. It's a pretty specific prophecy that was very specifically fulfilled. Pretty wild, pretty amazing, pretty awesome. Um, and then, in order to carry out their wishes to have Jesus executed, they bring him to Pilate. And now Jesus stood before the governor, and the governor, Pilate, asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Or it was probably more like said this, "So you are the king of the Jews?" And Jesus says, "You said it." In other words, you said it accurately. It is correct what you said. Um, and while he was being accused by the chief priest and the elders, he didn't say anything. And then Pilate was amazed by that. He said to him, "Don't you hear how much they're saying about you?" But he didn't answer him on any charge, or even one charge, so that the governor was greatly amazed. And so Pilate was convinced he was innocent, eventually caught on to the reality that they had done this absolutely out of envy. It wasn't because of any real legal issue. It wasn't really even for any real religious reason. It was simply that of none other than absolute envy of Jesus. So Pilate, noting the fact that every year at the time of the Passover festival, the Passover feast, that he would release a prisoner to them. He's like, "Well, I've got Barabbas." One of three revolutionaries, one in particular who had murdered people, thought, well, surely they would allow me to release him instead of Jesus. Well, it backfired on him, unfortunately, because the chief priests and the elders, they had riled up the crowds to be absolutely convinced that Jesus needed to be crucified. And they were adamantly shouting for Jesus to be crucified. And they were saying for Barabbas to be released. And Pilate asked, well, what should I do with Jesus? And that's where they were answering, crucify him. And he said, why? What has he done wrong? But they just kept on shouting, crucify him, all the more. And then Pilate saw that this was getting nowhere, but that a riot was starting instead. He took water and he washed his hands and he said, I wash my hands of this man's blood. It's on you, not on me. You're the ones that's going to cause a riot over all of this if I don't proceed with him being crucified. Therefore, it's on you. And this is something also just wild as well. The people said, his blood be on us and on our children. What kind of parents is that? What kind of human beings is that? And then he released Barabbas to them. But after having Jesus flogged, he handed him over to be crucified. And that was whipped with a lead tipped whip, as in certain translations it reads. The best depiction of that I know of is the Passion of the Christ. I won't go into a lot more detail. I went into detail about it with the one I did yesterday because it talks about the same thing. Um, and so then the governor's soldiers, they took Jesus to headquarters and gathered the whole group of them. They stripped him and dressed him in a scarlet military robe. This must have been like a purplish, scarletish robe. They twisted together a crown of thorns. They placed it on his head and placed a reed in his hand. And they knelt down before him in mock worship. Hail, King of the Jews, they said, they cried. And then they spit on him. Some honoring of a king, right? Not at all. And they took the reed and they kept hitting him on the head. When they had mocked him, they stripped him of the robe and put his clothes on him and led him away to crucify him. And they took a man from the crowd, Simon of Cyrene, to help carry Jesus' cross because Jesus literally was not able to physically do so after all of this. So when they crucified him on a place called Golgotha, which means skull heel or place of the skull. Um, and they offered him wine mixed with gall to drink. When he tasted it, he would not drink it. After crucifying him, they divided his clothes by way of casting lots. And then they sat down and regarding him there, and above his head was a sign that indicated his charge, which says, "This is Jesus, the King of the Jews." The two criminals who were crucified with him, there were two criminals crucified with him, one on his right, one on his left. Uh, those who passed by were yelling insults at him, shaking their heads and saying, "The one who would demolish the temple and rebuild it in 3 days, can he not come down from this cross? Says, you are the Son of God. Come down from the cross." That's what they said. And in the same way, the chief priests, the elders, they mocked him as well, saying the same sort of things. He saved others, but he cannot save himself. He is the King of Israel. He is the King of Israel. Again, saying that in mockery. Let him come down from now from the cross, and we will believe him. He has put his trust in God. Let God rescue him now, if he wants him. For he said, "I am God's son." In the same way, even the criminals who were crucified with him kept taunting him. So at this point, the revolutionaries are taunting Jesus, they're mocking Jesus. Um, and of course, we have Luke's account, though, where one of those criminals flipped. So we'll get into that tomorrow, God willing. And from noon until 3 in the afternoon, there was darkness over the land. So Mark's gospel tells us that this all started at 9 a.m. Then at 12 o'clock, there was darkness all over the land, all the way until for 3 straight hours, all the way until 3 p.m. in the afternoon. And about that time is when Jesus cried out with a loud voice, "Eloi, Eloi, lema sabachthani." Now, some of you Hebrew speakers, you could say that better than me, in which my understanding that was Aramaic, but Aramaic and Hebrew are quite similar. But it means, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Which is the very first verse of Psalm 22, which is a psalm full of of prophecies 1,000 years before this event happened, of great details of Jesus' crucifixion. It's pretty amazing stuff. And when some of they're standing there and said, "He's calling for Elijah, Eloi, Eloi, Elijah, Elijah," I don't know. Immediately, one of them ran and they got a sponge, filled it with sour wine, fixed it on a reed, and then offered him a drink. But the rest said, Let's see if Elijah comes to save him. And Jesus shouted again with a loud voice and gave up his spirit. So we're being told two other sayings. He said here in Luke, well, actually, John, um, it is finished is the first thing after the outcry of my God, why have thou forsaken me? Or why have you forsaken me? And then there's also, into your hands I commit my spirit, praying to the Father. And suddenly the curtain of the sanctuary was torn in the temple. It's awesome stuff. And this is something that Matthew's gospel tells us that Mark's doesn't. And also, tombs were opened, and many bodies of the saints who had fallen asleep were raised. And they came out of the tombs after his resurrection, entered the holy city, and appeared to many. And then the centurion, and Mark's gospel tells us that the soldier who was opposite Jesus declared that Jesus must have indeed been the Son of God. Well, Matthew's gospel gives us a little bit more details. Not only that soldier, but it says the centurion and those with him who were guarding Jesus saw the earthquake and the things that happened. They were terrified and said, "This man really was God's son." It says that they said that. It wasn't just the one. And Mark's gospel didn't say it was just one, it did, but it did say that the one that was opposite Jesus, yes, he did. But it didn't say he was the only one. Here it's saying that he and others. Love the beauty of the tapestry between the four gospels. So many women who had followed Jesus from Galilee ministered to him and were there. They were looking from a distance. One of them was Mary Magdalene. Another was Mary, the mother of James and Joseph, which is the half brothers of Jesus, which makes her also the mother of Jesus. But then there was also Mary, the mother of James and John, Zebedee's sons. And so then, when it was evening, a rich man of Arimathea, his name was Joseph, fulfillment of Isaiah 53:9, came and asked for Jesus' body from Pilate. Pilate ordered that it be released. Uh, so Joseph took the body, wrapped it in linen cloths, and placed it in his new tomb, never been used before, which he'd cut into the rock. And he left after rolling a great stone against the entrance of the tomb. And Mary Magdalene and the other Mary, which that would have been Mary, the mother of Jesus, have, um, and then here's one other detail that Matthew's gospel says that the very next day on that Saturday, the Sabbath, the religious leaders they came to Pilate and said, "Look, we heard that there was some kind of buzz going around that he would rise from the dead. Well, we really need you to do something because we'll be in a worse situation than what we were before if we don't do something. We need to station guards there at the tomb to make sure that nobody takes his body." And then Pilate allowed them to station their own soldiers there, their own guards there. And then they went and made the tomb secure by sealing the stone and setting the guard. It may or may not have been enough to keep people from stealing the body, but it was not enough to keep Jesus from rising from the dead. The sealed tomb, nor the soldiers stationed there. Jesus is alive and well, even to this day. It didn't just end with that part of the story, and that's where we're going to keep covering the other gospel accounts about um, Jesus' crucifixion, but then we're definitely going to move on to the gospel accounts about his resurrection. And by the way, don't know about for you, but where I am, And for many of us, if not all of us around the world, Sunday is a celebration of Easter in and of itself. So excited about that, and excited to continue to walk through the story of Jesus with you in a way that we all can use this to prepare for Easter. No matter what time of the year, you can use this just to be reminded of what Jesus did for us, how much he really loved us, how much he really loved you, enough to die for you, when yet he didn't deserve a single thing. Be blessed.